Vladimir Putin has ruled Russia for more than 20 years. College-age Russians have known no leader other than Putin. There have been 5 American presidents: Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now Joe Biden during Putin's time in charge. So far. According to a new constitution adopted in 2020, Putin can serve as president until 2036. If he were to do so, he will have been in power longer than Joseph Stalin, Peter the Great, and Catherine the Great, making him the longest-serving Russian ruler since Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century. In this video, we will examine the nature of the Putin regime, what some people call Putinism, and we'll discuss several different ways of thinking about Putinism.
People mean different things when they talk about Putinism. For some experts, Putinism is an ideology or worldview. For others, Putinism is a political system or system of rule. Some people use the term primarily to talk about Russian domestic politics, while others might speak about Putinism as a shorthand for Russia's international actions and strategy. There is no scholarly or expert consensus on what the essence of Putinism truly is. In this video, we will talk about Putinism in 2 different ways. First, we will talk about Putinism as a mentality, or what Professor Brian Taylor calls a code. Secondly, we will talk about Putinism as a system of rule, or a political system. For some people, Putinism is primarily about ideas. Indeed, some scholars treat Putinism as an ideology. The word ideology generally refers not just to a specific idea, but to an entire system of ideas that are coherent, internally consistent, and meant to serve as a guide for action. A good example would be the ideology of Marxism-Leninism, which guided the Soviet Union. It does not appear, however, that Putin himself is interested in establishing a universal ideology. In that sense, talking about Putinism as an ideology may be misleading. Other scholars, in contrast, see no real ideas behind Putin's actions. Rather, they argue that Putin is a pragmatist who pursues his rational self-interest. Under this approach, it's not necessary to understand what Putin thinks to understand his actions. In his book, The Code of Putinism, Brian Taylor takes a middle ground between seeing Putin as a strong ideologue and seeing him as a pure pragmatist. Rather, he argues that Putin is motivated by a code or mentality. This code comprises a combination of ideas, habits, and emotions that are exhibited by Putin and his close associates. Taylor's approach is loosely based on an argument made by 20th century German sociologist Max Weber, who argued that there are 4 basic motives for human behavior: rational self-interest, ideas, habits, and emotions. Taylor argues that ideas such as statism and conservatism, habits such as control and loyalty, and emotions such as resentment and vulnerability are part of the code of Putinism and play a role in shaping Russian foreign and domestic policy. In addition to thinking of Putinism as a mentality, one can also think of it as a type of political system or way of ruling. The Russian political system under Putin falls into the category of what political scientists call electoral authoritarianism. Other countries that fall in that general category include Turkey and Zimbabwe. Electoral authoritarian regimes hold elections that are not completely rigged, but the system is so tilted in favor of the ruling group or party that the elections are not really fair. Although electoral authoritarian regimes mimic the features of democracy, they lack one of democracy's defining features: elections that are fundamentally uncertain and that can result in the incumbent party losing and stepping down. There are several different types of authoritarian regimes. Political scientists distinguish between monarchies, military regimes, single-party regimes, and personalist dictatorships. Russia's form of electoral authoritarianism is closest to the personalist dictatorship type. There is no king or queen. The military is subordinate to civilian rule, and there is no strong political party that can constrain Putin's actions. Saying that Russia is a personalist authoritarian regime does not mean that Putin decides everything on his own. There are other powerful actors in the system, such as government officials or wealthy business people. However, Putin can usually have the final word on policy issues that are important to him. One source of Putin's power is the Russian Constitution, which grants a great deal of authority to the president relative to other parts of the political system, such as the prime minister or the parliament. Russia's constitution has been described as super-presidential, and Taylor argues that Putin's power makes the term hyper-presidential an accurate description of Putinism as a political system. There is one final aspect of Putinism as a system of rule that is worth highlighting. Like in many other electoral authoritarian regimes, the formal constitutional rules are often less important than the informal rules of the game.
Изменение Конституции под конкретного человека я считаю некорректным. Если бы я считал, что тоталитарная или авторитарная система является для нас наиболее предпочтительной, то я бы просто изменил Конституцию. Как вы понимаете, это было легко сделать.
In Russian politics, informal groupings that involve a mix of public and private figures, as well as economic and political elites, often work collectively to advance the interests of the group. Russians often refer to these informal groupings as clans. In a personalist authoritarian system with a super-president, these clans will vie to influence Putin and advance their agendas with him. To summarize, experts describe Putinism in various ways. Most political scientists who study Russia would agree that Russia is an electoral authoritarian regime, that as an authoritarian regime, it most closely fits into the category of personalist dictatorship, and that the Russian constitution is super-presidentialist. Where experts would disagree is how much Putinism is about Putin and his psychology. For some analysts, Putin's approach to ruling can be explained by thinking about how any personalist leader in an electoral authoritarian regime would behave. For other observers, Putinism can only really be understood by trying to understand the mentality of Putin and his close associates, who share a similar worldview. Taylor argues in The Code of Putinism that one needs to understand both Putin's mentality and the system of rule, which combines electoral authoritarianism with strong informal groupings or clans.
When former Russian President Boris Yeltsin announced Vladimir Putin as his intended successor in late 1999, few people thought Putin would still be ruling Russia more than 2 decades later. During this time, Putin has transformed Russia from a struggling democracy into an authoritarian regime, one that has generally become more repressive and closed over time. Today, his power looks strong and unassailable. Comparative political scientists, however, observe that personalist autocracies can be fragile. As Putin gets older and he approaches possible presidential elections in 2024, he will have to decide if he intends to try to stay in power for 3 decades or longer. Under Putinism, as it currently works, no one can make that decision other than Putin himself.